Hi, I'm Ted Staunton. I make up stories for people. And in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about mystery stories. I'm going to share something from the latest mystery that I've written, and I'm also going to try and give you 5 tips that you could use to try and make up a mystery story of your own. Now, the story that I have written is called Bounced. It's in this book. It's published by Scholastic Canada, and you can find it at libraries and bookstores just about everywhere. But before we look at Bounced, let's talk a bit about mysteries themselves. I said that I was going to give you 5 tips, and the first tip is a very simple one. Imitate the stories that you like to read. Now, if you're interested in making up your own mystery, that tells me that you already like to watch and read mystery stories. So, if you have a favorite hero or crime-fighting duo, or even better, a favorite villain, you could use them in a story that you make up on your own. If you like the way that your favorite author tells a story, see if you can use that voice to tell the story you want to tell. Now, you might find that difficult to do because you're not that person, but that's okay. It will help get you started figuring out the best way for you to tell your own story. Now, how do I know that works? Well, simple, because that's what happened to me. When I was 10 or 11 years old, I found in a junk shop near where my family's summer cottage was some books. I don't know how clearly you can see them, but they say the world's best 100 detective stories. Now, these were old books even when I was a kid, and the stories in them would be over 100 years old now, but they're still really cool. And here, let's see some of the titles here. The Curious Circumstances of the Two Left Shoes, The Club of One-Eyed Men, The Jeweled Casket, Fingerprints Can't Lie. How can you go wrong with stuff like that? These made me want to make up my own mystery stories. And I did, kind of. I made up a story, sort of like these, about a jewel theft at a museum. I knew what the main part of the puzzle was, and I knew who did it, but I could never quite figure out how to tell it. Still, it got me started, and it got me imagining. Now, here's tip number 2, and this is one of the things that I didn't understand when I started making up my own puzzle. Very simple again. One puzzle leads to another. In a good mystery story, there's always more than one mystery. Now, in the one that I was trying to make up, there was just who stole the jewels. But there have to be other things happening to keep readers interested and intrigued. So that's where something like Bounced comes in. Let me share a little bit of this story to give you an idea of how a simple mystery story can become complicated and can become more fun. Now, Bounced is about a character named Duncan Fortune. Duncan is in grade 6, and he loves mysteries. He loves reading them, and he wants to make up a mystery of his own. Well, what Duncan would really love is to get involved in a real-life mystery, but he doesn't think there's any mysteries around where he lives, and he's wrong about that. But in the meantime, he's been reading some books called The World's Best 100 Detective Stories, and he's got an idea for a story about a jewel theft at a museum. Trouble is, he doesn't know how to tell it. Well, as he's puzzling over how to tell it, he and his friends get one of these, a bouncy ball. They start bouncing it around, and pretty soon, this ball ricochets them into a real-life mystery. They try to puzzle out who has been robbing banks all around the city that they live in. And if they can figure out who's been doing this, there's a big reward. So there's the main part of my puzzle. Now, to make it more complicated, I put a few extra things in. I'm going to read you a little bit from chapter 9 in Bounced. And I'll just set this up for you. And as I do, if you listen carefully, I think you'll see some ways that Duncan's life is going to get really complicated really quickly. Duncan and his friends have gone biking in a local park. There's a big crowd gathered around a pond because it turns out there's an alligator sitting on a log in the pond. Now, this is not alligator country. Nobody knows where the gator came from or how to get it out until somebody else shows up. A man called Marty Raymond, who nobody has ever seen before, arrives, and he claims to be an expert on alligators. He says he has a store called Gator Aid. He'll get that alligator out of the pond. Come tomorrow at 1 o'clock, he tells everybody. I'll have the television here, I'll have the radio and the newspapers. You can film me and put me on YouTube if you want. It'll be quite a show. And he turns to Duncan and his friends and says, and you kids are coming too, right? Of course, they say. Well, on the way home, they realized that at 1 o'clock tomorrow, when Marty Raymond said to arrive, they're supposed to be in school. They're not the kind of kids to ditch school, but they decide that maybe they should just this once. So the next day, they go back to the park. They figure out how to get out of school without anyone knowing. They sneak back to the park. Just before they get there, Duncan takes his brand new cell phone out. He turns it off. He tucks it in his pocket because he doesn't want to be tempted to take any pictures to show his Aunt Jen, that's who he lives with, that he's been someplace he shouldn't. And down they go to the pond. Big crowd, television cameras, everybody's there. And Marty Raymond sees them and he says, "My helpers have arrived." What? Say the kids. And suddenly they're involved in trying to capture an alligator. I'll read you a little bit of what happens. Marty Raymond said to me, "You're my net man." "What's that?" I said. "A gator's got 2 blind spots, right in front, right behind. I sneak up behind. You stay dead in front of him, and you keep the pole flat ahead of you, just under the water. Go real slow and quiet. He won't see you, or he'll know you're there. If I signal, you pull that pole with the net on it up, because if our buddy spooks, he'll dive, and he'll go right into it." I looked at the pond. It had never looked swampier. "You mean we're just going to wade in?" "Why not? It's not very deep. Besides, you got a life jacket on." "But what if the gator—" Marty Raymond knelt and gave me a long sideways look. He whispered, "Nothing to it, partner. Just stay cool and leave the heavy lifting to me. Main thing is we give him a show. Got it?" I nodded. He stood up. "Let's do it." "Now, just a minute," somebody said. "Surely you're not letting those kids—" "Sir," Marty Raymond said, "those kids can deal with this better than most adults. They're trainers in Gatorade's Kids and Critters program. They know more about handling reptiles than these folks do." He waved a hand at the police and animal control officers. "Situations like this, standard procedure, certificate requirement. Kindly stand back, keep the noise down, we'll get her done." I moved to my spot with the pole and the net. Marty Raymond stepped into Green Pond. He waved to me. I took a deep breath and I stepped in. Water flooded my sneakers. I edged forward. The bottom sucked at my feet. The water was so murky I couldn't see them by the time my knees were wet. Something was clutching at my bare legs. I wished I'd worn jeans. I tried not to think about what might be down there. The pond got deeper faster than I expected. At waist deep, I slipped that net and pole into the water ahead of me, just under the surface the way he'd told me. The bumps of the gator's eyes and snouts sat on the green scum of the pond like gun sights, maybe 20 yards away, and I was right on target. I looked at Marty Raymond. He nodded. The gator hadn't moved. We eased in farther. My life jacket began to bob. Marty Raymond was chest deep in that blanket of scum now, about 30 feet back of the gator. I was at the edge of the stuff. It was so thick you couldn't see the net and pole just under the surface. I could feel the bottom dropping off steeply. I couldn't go further without my life jacket floating me off my feet. I stopped. I stared hard at those dark little bumps. They were so still. I wondered if the gator was really there. It had to be there, because if it wasn't there, where was it? That was a thought I didn't need. I clutched the pole tighter. Then Marty Raymond sank slowly. His arms stretched in front of him until only his head seemed to bob on the surface, a hat-wearing balloon. There was no sound. His head drifted closer and closer. He was 10 feet back. The gator didn't move. 9 feet. 8 feet. I thought about teeth like razors. 6 feet. 5. 4. Now, I'll stop right at the thwop because I wouldn't want to give anything else away. But let's just think for a second about what I read there in Bounced. Things got very complicated. For example, Duncan and his friends want to keep skipping school a secret. I put something in that scene to make sure that that couldn't happen. Duncan tucked his cell phone away so that he wouldn't get in trouble because of it. Where did he put it? He's going to get in trouble. Third, what is going on with this guy, Marty Raymond? He tells lies. The kids don't know anything about a Kids and Critters program. He's got Duncan and his friends in all kinds of danger, and they don't know what to make of him. When Aunt Jen hears about Marty Raymond, she goes ballistic. Things get even more mysterious when it turns out that the description of the bank robber sounds a lot like this guy. What's going on there? Now, that brings me to the third tip. So things got more complicated. There's one more puzzle. But something else I hope you noticed was the third tip about writing a mystery is put some funny in too. I hope I got some funny in that scene. If you put in something funny when people are expecting mysterious or terrifying, you'll catch them by surprise, and that will make your story more interesting to them. Now, my fourth tip is something you might also have noticed in that reading. Sometimes it can be hard to figure out what to put in a mystery, but this does make it easier. Use stuff from real life. You probably noticed that Duncan, like me, had a copy of World's Best 100 Detective Stories. Duncan, like me, had made up a story about a jewel robbery at a museum. That story that he's making up is in the book, by the way, and he tells you just enough of it that you might be able to figure out how to tell it for yourself. And in fact, at the back of the book, Duncan even shares some of the ways he started to try and tell the story. If any of those give you ideas, go for it. Write that story yourself. But there's more in the story, in the book, than from real life than just those things. The bank robber in my book was inspired by a real-life bank robber I read about in the newspaper. The real-life bank robber was in Texas. They were very mysterious, and they had a very, very strange reason for robbing banks. I wanted to put something like that in my book, so I did. Marty Raymond, the reptile guy. Well, I read a really interesting book about the very strange people who steal and smuggle exotic pets and reptiles all around the world. Often, they are stranger than the animals that they deal with. I wanted to put someone like that in my book, so I got the idea for Marty. And of course, a few years back, somebody really did dump an alligator into a big pond in Toronto's High Park. When I found out about it, I knew it was going in the book. Suddenly, I had lots of ideas. I had Duncan, and I had a whole bunch of things I wanted to write about. The trick was how to connect them together. Well, I was at a store in Toronto, and I found a bouncy ball. I gave it a test bounce. It flew all over the place. I bumped into all kinds of things, and suddenly I thought, a bouncy ball could ricochet Duncan and the other characters all through my story and connect things together. So that's what I used. Well, that brings me to my very last tip. Puzzles and mysteries are fun, but what's sometimes even more fun are the people in the stories. If you make the people as interesting as the puzzle, if you make somebody like Marty as interesting as an exotic reptile smuggler, if you make your bank robber somebody mysterious, or you make the bad guy like somebody that you don't care for, that makes your story even more entertaining. People often remember the characters more than they remember the puzzle. Well, I wrote my mystery. It turned out to be a mystery that had to do with writing a mystery. And along the way, well, actually, I solved a mystery too. I solved another mystery by figuring out the mystery of how to tell the story. I hope some of the 5 tips that I gave to you will help you to make up your own mystery. Whether they do or not, I hope you have tons of fun reading lots more mysteries. I'm going to have fun making more up. Bye for now.